Hello, hello. So, what would you do if one of the world's richest living artists told you to stop making art? I found myself in this problem about 2 years ago, and I'm going to show you how I got into this trouble. It all starts with the artist Chuck Close. Now, because I got in trouble for making art, I cannot show you any of the images. I take Chuck Close's threats very seriously. And so all the images I'm going to show you, including the faces, this is not the art that I created. This just looks like the art. It's examples of the work so that I will not get in trouble, and hopefully this TED Talk will go online. Okay. So this is not Chuck Close. This is my friend Pat. He was gracious enough to let me take his picture, and he's going to be my Chuck Close model. So in 1967, Chuck Close started painting from photographs. And this may sound not too revolutionary, but in the late 60s, to paint from a photograph was almost seen as cheating. You know, real artists and real painters should go out into the landscape, they call it in plein air, and paint from the natural light. And what Chuck Close was doing was taking a photograph, and in his dark studio, it wasn't even considered painting, it was considered a reproduction of the photograph. But regardless of that, he pioneered, and to this day, he still paints from photograph. And so I'm going to explain his process. He basically starts with a picture, usually of himself or his friends. He puts a grid over this, and then he makes a canvas with a similar grid, and these canvases that he paints on are like 10 feet tall. And so the squares on the photograph may be an inch, but then when you're looking at it on the canvas, the grid is like 4 inches. And then what he does, he goes and he paints basically block by block, slowly building up the face. And he has this great way of describing it like Chuck Close has this great way of describing his work. It's a lot like playing golf. And the first hit is the drive from a long distance, and that's sort of the first color that he'll put down. He's not going to make a hole in one. And so he'll go back, and then the second time he'll go in with a smaller putter. I don't play golf. So right, you putt. And he builds up all this detail, and it takes him about 4 months going line by line, square by square, until finally he gets this photorealistic image. And it probably looks great from back there. And with each little pixel, when you get up close, they're these little abstract paintings. Now remember, this is not Chuck Close's work. This is just what it looks like. And I encourage you, during the break, go on your smartphone. If you haven't seen this work, please look at it. It's amazing stuff. My representations, I did an okay job. But yeah, there's these great little abstract paintings, thousands of them in all of his paintings. And like I said, he's been doing this since the late 60s. He's painted Barack Obama. He did Bill Clinton in this format. So he's done very well for himself. And so I come along, and actually, this is actually me. I gave myself permission. I'm not going to sue myself for this. I think I'm over here. Yeah, here we are. And what I did, so I would start with, I'm going to put this up so it's not, I'll leave that down. I would take the Chuck Close painting and scan it into a computer. I should have said, this is in 2001. And I have been working with computers since I was 12 years old in 1988. And so for me, a computer, or a mouse feels just as natural in my hand as a paintbrush or whatever tool an artist chooses to use. And at the time, I'd been making my own mosaics, not necessarily like Chuck Close, but I used barcodes or any kind of little dot that I could come up with. And I thought, oh, what a great dot that Chuck Close has already created. And wouldn't it be awesome to sort of remix his work for the new millennium? And so I scanned it in, and in Photoshop, this is what Photoshop is like, for those of you who don't know. I would go in, and I'd cut them all out. And this process in Photoshop would take about 8 hours to disassemble one portrait. And then once I had all the tiles cut up, I would then index them or just arrange them into a giant folder. And then I created a Photoshop filter. And for those of you who don't know Photoshop, it is a magical program, but there's still a lot of work that went into it. It took me 6 months to create I think of it a lot like a player piano. You know those pianos that play themselves? That's sort of how I code Photoshop. And to get that to play a song, or the song I wanted to play, took 6 months. So computers are not labor-saving devices. I put a lot of work into it. Yes, and so I got all my tiles figured out, and then I pressed the button. I pressed the magic Photoshop button, and 4 days later, it would take the computer 4 days in 2001 to rearrange all of the tiles, and this is supposed to be my face. Now again, it's pixelated, but that's the point. That's what my work is about. Sort of what is the least amount of information that you can still get a story out of. And so in 2001, like I said, it took 4 days to make one face. And I had bigger plans for the project. So I kind of put the project on hold. And in 2008, computer speed had gotten faster, and more importantly, internet speed had gotten faster. Everyone got rid of their dial-up modems. And I launched my filter online. And so what it allowed you to do was, or allowed anyone to upload a face or image of your dog, which a lot of people seem to do, and 30 seconds later, you could choose from 3 Chuck Close paintings, and then 30 seconds later, it would rearrange whatever face into a Chuck Close painting. And my website was live for about 2 years. It was free for anyone to use. It actually cost me quite a bit of money for server space, and I had to hire a programmer to help with some little computer bugs. And then in 2010, I got an email from Chuck Close, a very angry email in all caps, saying that that if I don't take my website down immediately, he will threaten me with a lawsuit. Now, like I said before, he's one of the world's richest living artists. He's actually number 14 according to the last, I think it's Forbes magazine puts together the study. He's worth an estimated $25 million. And so I took his threats very seriously. And I've actually gotten a lot of pro bono advice from lawyers who say that even if I am right, and even if my work does fall under fair use, it would still cost me hundreds of thousands to go into court and just to prove that I'm right. And so I did what he said. I'm like, yes, sir, Mr. Close, I will take my website down. And I asked, I was like, can we at least keep the website up to warn other computer artists like myself not to go down? I spent 6 months programming it, 20-something hours dissecting things, countless months, years on this project. And I was like, we really probably should tell other people not to do what I've done. And he agreed. So now if you go to my website, it says, do not make Chuck Close art, do not use his name, this is what Chuck Close told me not to do, and do not use his images. And I was like, okay, that's kind of weird to tell an artist not to make art, but that's the world we live in. And then a short time later, the Huffington Post wrote an article about my Chuck Close problem. And I actually read all the comments, and I went into the worst depression for like 6 months. So this is kind of like me coming out of that. And one thing, and so I did learn some really interesting I learned some very interesting things in the comments, mainly that I am not the only one doing this kind of Chuck Close art. And I found quite a few other artists. I'm going to show you an example, that uses Chuck Close's name and uses his images and is getting away with it. And so, her name is Devora Sperver. This is not Devora, this is my friend Holly. And Devora makes this really great work, and she's most well known for mosaics out of spools of thread. And so these are, again, during the break, look her website up. I've never seen any of her stuff in person, but the images, giant walls of spools of thread, thousands of spools of thread. There you go. And so, and she uses the computer, but then obviously mixes, steps away from the computer to actually touch the spools of thread. She's also done thumbtacks, anything that's colorful that you can buy in a lot of different varieties. And one of the things that caught my attention was her Chuck Close portrait. And what she did, she made a portrait out of Chuck Close with pipe cleaners. These like these little, these are the big kind, but they come in a variety of colors. And so she went, took Chuck Close's image and was like, okay, that matches orange, I'm gonna put an orange one there. And I think her work, like I said, I think her work is great, and I actually emailed her, and I was like, and we spoke on the phone, and she cannot explain why she's getting away with it, and I'm not. No, I mean, really, we spoke for a long time, and she actually asked me not to put her in this talk, so I'm sorry. But, she said something really interesting that when she first, I'm moving ahead of myself, but, so I did some more research on Devora, and again, I cannot show you her image or Chuck Close's image, but if you were to look on the internet for an image of Chuck and Devora, you would find something very similar to this. They did a speaking panel hosted by Omaha's own Kurt Anderson in 2009. And so I know for a fact that they're friends. And like I said, she could not tell me why, what's the difference. Yeah. Oh, and so before my filter was shut down, I made one last image, just to make a good difference. So this is Chuck Close's image put back through the filter. And this is sort of my Mona Lisa, or my piece de resistance, because I can tell the difference, but Chuck Close felt like it was threatening his livelihood, and so I have one last photograph, because we're all really good friends, and what my hope is that someday, instead of celebrating, so yeah, this is actually me, my wife, Pat and Holly, or the other backwards, but I hope someday it'd be nice to have a show, and instead of getting mad for what we have in common, we can celebrate our differences. So yeah.